And by that point, I was hooked. It was 2005, 2006. The finance companies were giving out money like it was going out of fashion. I decided I'd become the world's best borrower. They wanted to lend, I wanted to borrow. And over the next 3 or 4 years, I opened 11 strip clubs, 50 or 60 bars and pubs, a hotel, restaurants, juice bars, property portfolio. And by 2007, 2008, had a very large 8-figure business. I felt like I looked like an absolute baller, but in reality it was all built on a bed of sand and a deck of cards, and was heading for a disaster.
Matt's a very good friend of mine, incredibly successful, has got an amazing backstory, has an insane network, and I would say a lot of your success has come off the back of your ability to network, and I've learned a lot from just seeing what you do and being around you. So for everyone here today, Matt has a lot of experience to share, and really grateful for you to share your story and your knowledge.
Thanks, buddy. Thank you for having me. And I have to say, for someone who loves networking so much, I also consider myself pretty antisocial. But Charlie's one of the few people that I love to spend a lot of time with. So thank you for having me here. Also, please forgive my horrendous speaking voice. I was feeling fluey last night. Woke up this morning with like daggers in my throat. And but the beauty of Dubai, as anyone who lives or visits here, is you can get whatever you want, whenever you want. And with about 90 minutes later, I had the IV drip, I had the oxygen tank. I'm lying on the couch. I've got the IV drip in my arm. I've got the oxygen tank in my in my nose. And my young and beautiful girlfriend looks over and thinks, "Fuck, that's what it's like to live with an older man." But I'm much recovered now. So we're going to talk about networking today. As Charlie said, I'm going to tell you about my backstory in a minute. But everything, whilst what happened in my earlier life was never so much planned, and I think I learned a lot more by accident. In hindsight, I put down all my success, or very much most of it, to networking and the people that I've met at various times in my life who've been able to be absolutely instrumental in doing a deal with, in making money with, in introducing me to somebody else. So it's something I'm very excited to talk about. These are the things we're going to talk about today. By the way, I love pink. You're going to get used to that as these slides go on. But I was going to say I don't know why I'm not wearing any, but I do have my pink socks on just to make sure I'm on brand. But we're going to talk about who I am. We're going to talk about the 3 most important words in networking. We're going to talk about online versus offline networking. One of those that people miss out a lot. We're going to talk about the biggest relationship building mistakes. We're going to talk about the biggest networking mistakes. We're going to talk about the number 1 reason why people hate networking. We're going to talk about what being a power networker has achieved for me. And we're going to talk about the 2 very different ways that I network. Just so I get a read on everybody, I mean, who here likes networking? And who here absolutely doesn't like it? Only you. We're going to change that by the end of this. And who thinks they're any good at it? Okay. First of all, I think when it comes to networking, one of the big things that people miss out is who needs to network. And I think a lot of the time people think, oh, I need to network for a purpose. Maybe I'm looking for a job. Maybe I'm looking for a hire. Maybe I'm trying to do a deal. But for me, networking is, I guess, is almost part of. Well, it's not almost. It's 100% part of my life, and it should be very much part of everybody's life if you want to be successful. Whether you're an employee, whether you're an employer, whether you're already well known, whether you're an influencer, whether you want to do something right now, or whether you think you may want to do something in the future, doing the networking itself has to become a big part of your life. So listen, we're just going to backtrack into my story for a little bit. James was talking about being the oldest person in the room, but I think he's making me feel old now. I mean, I'm 43 now, but my backstory goes back to late 80s, early 90s, and I always wanted to be in business. I didn't particularly know why. Well, I think the only real reason at the time was in the late 80s and early 90s, the only way we thought we were told to make money was to own your own business. And I very much wanted to make money. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to make a load of money. I also thought I wanted to work in musical theatre and be Danny Zuko, but when I realised my singing voice wouldn't hold up, I did have to revert back to wanting to go into business. Now, my father, he had his own business. He has a very successful business, very different to anything I do, and it was nothing that I was ever involved in. But I think obviously being around that entrepreneurial background and watching him bring staff home from work and going on work dinners, work trips, watching trainings and stuff, obviously rubbed off on me in some way. And I spent my teenage years trying to do everything possible to make money. I again showing my age, but if anyone remembers the UK in the kind of early 90s and mid 90s, we used to have a magazine called The Exchange and Mart. I'm sure there's online equivalents of it now, but this magazine, The Exchange and Mart, used to sell all kinds of crap. But then in the back of it there was always business opportunities for sale. I say, business opportunities, various different Ponzi schemes where you could send off a stamped addressed envelope, to be able to receive for 20 quid the secret, to be able to send another stamped addressed envelope to ask someone else to send you 20 quid and all these things. And I used to buy and look for everything because I had no idea how to do anything or what I wanted to do, but I was just very, very hungry. And I'd go to the markets, I'd buy and sell every product I could get my hands on, from Tamagotchi pets to blow up sofas, blow up cushions, and everything in between. And by the time I got to 18, I'd done my A-levels. I was leaving school. And I didn't want to go to uni. My parents, particularly my mother, very much wanted me to go to university because, again, back in the late 90s, it was still that kind of era where if you didn't go to university, you were kind of thought of as a failure to your parents, particularly if you'd been in private education, and also, to get any kind of job in a corporate environment or in, I guess, a respectable employer, you needed to have university on your CV. I didn't want to go. I was convinced that it was just going to hold me back 3 years because I was going to go off and run my own business, and I managed to convince my parents to let me go to university and work in a business alongside at the same time. And my dad, he'd just sold his business at this point, well, a year or so before. He wasn't really doing anything, and he'd invested in a corporate clothing company at the time. It was a family business, not my family's business, but it was a family business that made uniforms, career wear, so clothes for security guards, for bus drivers, for nurses. And it was theoretically a very successful business, which had come into a short-term cash flow difficulty, and my dad could make a small investment, and they'd be able to get back to trading again. So I convinced them to let me work in there in sales whilst going to uni at the same time. Now, all of my friends who went to uni, back in the day, they'd have probably 6 hours a week of stuff to do. They'd have one little book to read, 6 hours of lectures to do. I thought, well, that's going to leave me plenty of time to work. I walk in, I was doing a business in accountancy degree, and I walk in on the first day, and I just get given these stacks and stacks and stacks of books and lectures that were going to take 30 plus hours a week. And there was no way I'd have been able to do the uni and be able to do the work as well. So I kind of begged and grovelled and said, please let me leave uni. I'm going to, I want to work in this business. I'm going to spend a year at doing my best with it, and hopefully by then everything will have worked out. If it doesn't, I'll go back to uni, and we can just consider it a gap year, and I'll be no worse off than a lot of my friends who'd taken a gap year at the time. So off I went, and that's what I did. And this business, we found out very quickly that it was an absolute dog's dinner. It had been trading for 40, 50 years, but in the state it was now, the customers were leaving, the suppliers wouldn't supply, the family members were incompetent, verging on fraudulent, and the whole thing was falling to pieces. My dad had ended up putting in 15 to 20 times the amount of investment that he'd originally planned to do. But he wasn't doing anything with his business. He was sat at home, and not because he was being lazy, but he kind of had enough from the stresses of the work he'd done. And I was obviously young and hungry, and also getting pissed off with the fact that I go into work every day and see that effectively my dad's money was getting squandered by these people who were taking the piss. I used to come home to dinner every night. I'd be banging my hands on the table saying, "Come on, please come into work and do something about this." And Eventually, my dad turned around and he said, look, I've had 25 years of business. I've had 30 years of your mother. He goes, I'm just not interested. He goes, I'm too tired now. He goes, but you go and do something with it. You can't make it any worse than they've made it. So off you go. And I went in the next day and I fired literally everybody apart from this little old guy who worked in the warehouse. And we kind of rewound and went back to zero and started this business from scratch. Now, I knew nothing. I mean, I obviously at the time I thought I knew everything because I'd spent the previous few years reading every kind of business book or periodical I could get my hands on. And again, show my age there because back in those days, with the email was just starting. There was certainly no social media, and any of the information that I get was from big, thick, hardback books. But I thought I knew everything, and off I went. And I spent the next 3 years really having the biggest learning curve that I think I could have possibly have asked for in business. I had to learn how to recruit the staff. I had to learn how to decide what products we were going to supply, how to do sales, how to do marketing, how to do finance. I had to deal with suppliers who didn't want to supply to us. I had to apologize to customers, who didn't really want to deal with us. And ultimately, we found our feet. We went from supplying a small number of very big customers to a large number of very small customers. Removing the reliance on any one particular customer. And I took the business from when I started losing about £300,000 a year, and in its third year making about 30,000. Now these numbers, even in those days, not big numbers by any stretch. But really, what was important for me was was that turnaround, was that learning experience that, money aside, I got to experience pretty much every problem, or at the time what I thought was pretty much every problem a business owner could ask for. I'm sure you guys are very into your mentors and learning from people who've made the mistake so that you don't have to. And back in those days, I guess I hadn't had the experience, so I got to make the mistakes. And I made 3 years of very painful, very expensive mistakes, which ultimately took me to kind of 21, 22. And I felt I was ready to move on to something else, not because I'd achieved great success there, but just because I was also bored. I think at that point I was starting to learn that as much as it was important to find something that I could learn from and make money from, if I was really going to be successful in something, I would have to love what I did. And I always felt as a younger guy that I wanted to work in bars and clubs and pubs. Not because I had any experience, but as I'm sure some of you guys can attest to, as a young guy, we always think, if I own a bar, I can make loads of money, drink loads of beer, and meet loads of girls. I didn't really think there was much more of a business model to it than that. But that's what I went off to do. And a year or so prior, I'd been in Boston in the States. I'd been taken on a networking trip, something that we'll come on to talk about soon. But I didn't particularly appreciate what it was at the time. But our bank, they'd taken kind of 10 or 12 of their local customers over to America. Somewhat like these kind of masterminds. There was 3 days of events. You get to sit down with let's say world-class trainers, world-class speakers, but also more importantly, get to network with a lot of other local business owners. And it wasn't just a kind of 10 or 12 people from my bank. It was other regions, and there was 40 or 50 people there. And I'd met a guy who was in leisure himself. He was in bars and clubs. And we kept in touch, and when I decided I wanted to go and do my own bars and clubs, I contacted him, and he said, I've got just the right pub for you. It's one of mine. It's a great unit, but I just don't want it anymore. I'll let you take it on for free." And obviously, alarm bells should have been ringing, but at the time I thought, what a lovely guy doing me such a nice favour. And I went in and took over this horrendous community pub where the local gangsters used to leave their machetes and the guns on the tables before they went up to the bar to order their drinks. But what I did learn from this guy was, again, more business tricks that I didn't know before, and he used to teach me about cash flow and the importance of having a business model where you were getting paid by your customers before you were paying your suppliers. And over the next year or so, he taught me to buy a few pubs where we'd effectively go in on a Friday night. write a check. Again, we don't really have checks anymore, but we write a check to buy the pub and to buy the stock, and hopefully we could trade the arse off this pub over the next 3 or 4 days to turn that stock into cash, and the check would clear on Monday, and fingers crossed everything would be okay. So I had these pubs for a few years, so for a year or so, a few pubs. But they weren't, some were okay, some were not okay, but overall I wasn't really making any money. And I knew I needed to do something else. I needed to have some other kind of income stream that I could have, not just selling alcohol. Whether that was door money, whether it was selling food, whether it was promoters in there. But I needed something other than just selling alcohol. Now, in my personal life, I'd started to visit the local strip club, and on my nights off from my bars, I used to spend the nights in there. Hanging out with the local manager and wasting what little money I had at the time behind the bar at the strip club. And I decided, well, because I know the manager, because I know the girls, I therefore understand the business model, and that qualifies me to be able to go and open my own strip club. We went to look for a venue to open, and we found a place in Wakefield. And I found this freehold building. It was about £360,000. And at this point, I had 120 grand to my name from a couple of houses that I'd flipped and from some of the trading of these pubs. And I went into the local HSBC. Again, this certainly doesn't happen in England anymore. But I met this local bank manager, a guy called Andrew Bennett, who had his own local discretion. And back in these days, the guys could sign off their own loans without having to go up to credit. Just as long as it fit in some kind of broad boundaries and broad criteria. And this guy was allowed to sign off up to £1 million. And he said to me that basically if I put 100 grand deposit down, he'd give me a mortgage on the building, and then when I'd fitted out the building, he would then allow me to refinance it at its higher value, and give me another loan of 600 or 700 grand. So I thought, fantastic, this is what I need. I can go and open my bar. So I put down, like I say, circa 100 grand. And I went to go and find a contractor, and this is obviously where the problems start. And I'm not advocating anyone does this for 1 minute, but these were the guerrilla tactics we had to use at the time. I found a contractor, and it was looking like a £300,000 refit. It was a problem because I only had 20 grand left. So I sat down with this contractor. We agreed a payment plan that started with 20 grand for the first week, and various other monies for the rest of it. Gave him his 20 grand, and off he went. Started the fit out. Managed to dodge his calls for the next 2 or 3 weeks as the next weekly payment's due, and the next weekly payment's due. And by the time he's kind of fitted this unit out to 30% and I'm still only in for 20 grand, we sat down and I said, look, awkward conversation, but I haven't got any more money. However, what I have got is a mortgage offer to be able to refinance this building when it's fitted out at its higher valuation. So I know you're going to hate me, but if you can sit this out and finish the unit off, then I'll pay you some extra money at the end. I'll pay you some penalties. I said, we can fall out now, and you're going to be fucked, and I'm going to be fucked, or we can both make some money at the end of this. And luckily, he, I'm sure he doesn't like me any more to this day than he did back then, but he agreed. He had no choice but to see it through. And off he went, finished the unit. My local bank manager was true to his word. He refinanced it for me. I paid this contractor off, who was slightly happier than 12 weeks earlier. And the first bar opened. And it was pretty much a success from the outset. And I always say it was right place at the right time. I mean, I do obviously believe we had a model that I thought was going to be very different, and we were going to bring a professional and let's say genuine business attitude and genuine business principles to an industry that was obviously completely shunned and normally run by gangsters or rich people's playthings. But it was also a bit of the right place at the right time. Spearmint Rhino was starting to become quite prevalent in England, and they were spending big money on marketing. Stringfellows were still pretty popular, and I was 24 at the time, so it was a good story for the local press. And we hit the ground running, and the Wakefield bar did very well. Ran that for maybe 6 months, And I got the opportunity to buy another local strip club, actually a Spearmint Rhino in Harrogate that hadn't been performing very well. I knew why it wasn't performing very well. It wasn't taking money, because I used to visit this place. It wasn't that it wasn't taking it. It was that everybody who worked there was robbing it in some way. You know, the doorman had his hand in the till, the bar staff had his hand in the till, the DJs had their hand in the till. And I thought, well, all I need to do is take over it, fire all these people, and everything will be tickety-boo. But I had no money to go and do it. I got it from my bank manager, who at this point couldn't give me any more money. He introduces me to a local finance broker. I mean, I knew nothing about finance then, absolutely nothing. And this guy told me that he could do a refinance on my air conditioning units for me. He said, you've bought these air conditioning units for 30 grand. He goes, all you need to do is sign this paperwork, and basically what it means is I now own your air conditioning. You're going to rent it back off me for the next 3 years, and I'm going to put 30 grand in your bank. I signed the paper, he gives me the 30 grand, and I don't think I really understood what happened other than the fact I had 30 grand in my bank. I thought, well, what else can I go and find in this barter refinance as well? So over the next few weeks, I'm refinancing air conditioning units, fridge freezers, toilets, anything I can get my hands on to generate 200, 300 grand to go off and buy this Spearmint Rhino. Bought it. And by that point, I was hooked. It was 2005, 2006. The finance companies were giving out money like it was going out of fashion. I decided I'd become the world's best borrower. They wanted to lend, I wanted to borrow. And over the next 3 or 4 years, I opened 11 strip clubs, 50 or 60 bars and pubs, a hotel, restaurants, juice bars, property portfolio. And by 2007, 2008, had a very large 8-figure business. I felt like I looked like an absolute baller, but in reality, it was all built on a bed of sand and a deck of cards, and was completely over leveraged, was completely disorganized, and was heading for a disaster. Didn't really appreciate it at the time. Well, so didn't appreciate it at the time at all, because you don't know what you don't know. And I thought, well, we can get into the next month, and we can get into the next month, because when you've only been through the first part of a cycle, you don't know what's on the other end. And when you only know that for the last 4 or 5 years, everybody wants to lend you money, you think, well, they're going to keep lending you money for the next 4 or 5 years. And every time we got to a problem at the end of the month, the lender's a bit more, and lender's a bit more, and the wheels just seemed to keep turning until they didn't. And in the beginning of probably June-ish of 2008, the credit crunch had started to kick in. All the liquidity in the markets had dried up, and our lenders turned around and said, we can't lend to you anymore. I then had to have some awkward conversations with them to say, well, if you can't lend anymore, we have a problem. I need to renegotiate my loans with you. Never asked anyone to take a haircut, but basically said, look, I can't pay you over 2 years or 3 years, so I need 7 years or 10 years or whatever we needed to make this work. Some people said yes, some people said no, but ultimately not enough people said yes. And in the space of literally 6 or 8 weeks, and that really is how quick it happens. I mean, if I tell you the 1st of June 2008, my Experian credit rating, which I'm sure you all know, was 999. My mortgages were fine. My credit was perfect. 8 weeks later, the first business had gone into administration. Everything was cross-company guaranteed, so it pulled all the other businesses down. I personally guaranteed everything, so it pulled me down, and literally within the space of 8 weeks, I filed for personal bankruptcy, which at the time was for 45 million quid, the biggest personal bankruptcy outside of London at the time, and I was told that my life was now in tatters, and I'd never be able to work again, I'd never have any credibility again. I had a 1-year-old daughter, an ex-wife at the time, and wasn't really sure what was going to happen next, other than the fact that I had to do something. And I tell this story, and I talk on a few podcasts and things, and people always kind of want to dig deep into the mindset of the bankruptcy and the comeback and that kind of thing. And I always say that I actually don't really have let's say an exciting story to tell about how I went from losing it all to then coming back again, because ultimately for me, I can say, I could have sat at home, watching a bit of Jeremy Kyle and blaming everyone else for my own mistakes, or I could have gone back out to work again, and like I said, I had a 1-year-old daughter who needed feeding, a missus who needed a roof over her head, and I always say that I was never born to be poor, so I was never going to get paid being sat on the couch. And I went out the next day and really got back to work again. Because I think one of the things that I always get asked as well is, what does it feel like to lose everything? And it wasn't until, at the time, I used to, if you'd have asked me back in 2008, 2009, I'd tell a lot more of a, let's say, a financial answer to that question. If you ask me now I realise what's happened, I always say, well, I actually didn't lose anything. All I lost was my money. I didn't lose my contacts, my knowledge, my skill set, my experience. And if anything, I've come out of it with more experience than I had when I went in, because I've now been through something else that most people don't get to go through, and I've added to my experience. And there's that old expression of the fact that your first millions is your hardest million, and the more you make thereafter, the easier it becomes. I think that analogy kind of fit in very well with the story for me then, because yes, it had taken a few years to make decent money in my earlier days, but as horrific as my life and situation looked on paper at the end of 2008, it was very easy for me to get back into the game and very quick for me to start making money again, because I had the contacts, I had the ideas, I had the experience, and I had the people to deal with. I decided I needed a bit of a change from leisure. I'd always worked kind of all night in the bars, all day in the office. I was pretty exhausted from it all. And back in 2006, I'd started a finance company, more of a broker than a lender. It was a bit by accident, because I'd spent so much time borrowing from all of these lenders that I decided I kind of learned to be a lender by being a borrower. And I got a fantastic network of weird and wonderful lenders that that no one had really ever heard of. I had a lot of contacts in the local business space, and whenever any of my peers or friends were short of some money on a deal, they'd come to me. I'd match them up with one of these lenders and take a commission. So when I started back in kind of 2008, at the end of 2008, the beginning of 2009, I came back as a finance broker. Went from being a broker to a lender. One of my old investors kind of came back, and as much as some people are very pissed off with me for the money that they lost at the time, most of them realised that I'd never set out to do anything malicious. It was a case of, I guess, greed on all our parts, and naivety and stupidity. One of them came back, offered to back me to go and start a lending book, and if we condensed 10 years from 2012, 2013 to now, I've taken my experience from being a borrower to be a lender, taken my experience from being a business owner to be an advisor, and built a lending book, which is where now we specialise in lending to UK businesses, normally secured against some kind of asset, but always dealing in some kind of situation where other people or other lenders don't want to lend to that business, because not because it's a bad credit, not because it's a bad risk, but because there's something that they just don't understand about it. And we can approach it with my experience of, I always say, whatever problems you think that business has been through, believe me, I've had 500 times more, and I've come out to tell the tale on the other end. So as long as you're honest with me about your situation, I'm sure we can find an answer. And invariably, many of the businesses that we deal with don't even need money, or certainly don't need as much money as they think they would need. They need support, they need advice, and they need help in a situation where they've never been in that situation, and they'll probably never they won't know many other people who've been in that situation. But I get to help. And in the last 10 years, I've lent over 500 million quid to UK businesses, raised over 100 million from our investor network of high net worths. And now my core business consists of two different lending entities. I lend to law firms on litigation finance. I lend to all other kind of businesses in the UK, as long as it's secured. I've got a chain of bars and clubs, again, by accident. I swore I'd stay out of that game, but got dragged back in. An e-commerce business selling ladies' shoes and handbags. Not a fetish, just something that I accidentally got involved with. And I have a banking platform too. So these are all the things that keep me busy. But I guess, as I said at the beginning, at the heart of getting all of these businesses, at the heart of all my success, has always been down to my network.